Hi everybody, Crista Cowan here with another episode of the Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about researching Irish records, and before we dive into today's topic, I just need to apologize for earlier. We had this presentation scheduled for this morning, and I tried to broadcast live from the Roots Tech conference, but could not for the life of me find a consistent wireless signal to be able to do that. So we had to reschedule, and I thought 7 o'clock my time this evening was plenty of time for me to get home, and I got stuck in a traffic jam and just one thing after another. Anyway, so for those of you who are watching this live, thank you so much for your patience with me as I dealt with technical difficulties and my crazy schedule. Whether you're watching this live or watching this archived, I just want to encourage you, if you haven't already, to visit rootstech.org. The conference is going on right now. It's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday conference, and they are streaming several of the presentations, including tomorrow morning, Friday the 22nd. The CEO of Ancestry.com, Tim Sullivan, will be delivering one of the keynote addresses, so you might want to tune in for that and see what he has to share. With that said, let's get to today's topic. Today we are talking about researching Irish records. On Tuesday we spoke about beginning Irish research, and I gave you some basic information about what you need to do here in the U.S. before you can cross the pond and discover records in Ireland. Today, I'm just going to do a quick review of some of those things, and then we're going to talk very specifically about what Irish records are available on Ancestry.com, how you can find them, and some tips and tricks about ways you can search them and information that you're going to find in them. So let's dive in. Lots to cover. Let's talk first just about some of the challenges. This is just a review from what we spoke about on Tuesday. Just be prepared for some of the challenges of Irish records. The first thing you need to be aware of is that there are just very, very common names. And so you're going to have the most success if you identify family clusters, right? So you're not just looking for your John Murphy, you're looking for a John Murphy married to a Bridget O'Donnell. You're not just looking for John Murphy, you're looking for a John Murphy whose mother's name was Margaret O'Brien. So keep in mind that those family clusters, or that information, is what's going to help you know that you have the right person. Just remember that there was a fire in 1922, and a lot of records were destroyed in that. That doesn't mean Irish research is impossible. It just means we sometimes have to get a little creative. It also means that some of the typical records that we might be familiar with using in U.S. research, such as census records, are not going to be available. Civil registration in Ireland, unlike in England, for example, which began in 1837, civil registration in Ireland didn't begin until 1864. So we missed that whole potato famine, and the immigrants who came around that time in the 1840s, they're not going to be included in the countrywide birth, marriage, and death index because it didn't begin until later. There's also just a lack of early church records, just kind of a dearth of those, and so that creates some problems. And then when you do find parish records, those parish records don't always contain a whole lot of information. So I give you that information just as a review and to set some realistic expectations, not to discourage you. That is not my intention at all. So let's talk about what records are actually available for you. To begin searching Irish records, I'm just going to remind you to come armed with as much information as possible from your previous research. This is not one of those cases where you can say, oh, I found him in a census and I know he's about this old and he says he was born in Ireland. No, you need to know as much as possible. If you can find an exact birth date from death records here in the United States, do that. If you can find a town or a county for sure, but a town even better in Ireland where they're from, that's going to benefit you. There's going to be a couple of tricks to searching Irish records. First of all, you do have to have a World Deluxe subscription to search those records. So if all you have right now is a US-based subscription, you can use the card catalog to see what's available. But if you want to actually search by database or search those Irish records, you do need a World Deluxe subscription so that you have access to those records. So let me just show you. First, we'll look at the collection priority, and then we'll look at the card catalog, and then we'll look at some specific databases. Let's make my screen a little bit bigger for you there. Okay, when you are looking at the search form, the first thing you want to do is make sure that your search form is the advanced search form. So always click on Show Advanced. What that gives you is it gives you these exact, the filters by field, okay? What it also gives you, if you scroll down to the bottom of the search form, is what we call our collection priority. So if I was just searching for US records, which I do quite a bit, you can see here I have this set to United States, and I have this little box checked, and I don't know if you can read that or not, but it says show only records from these collections. So when I do a search and I'm looking for US records, I keep that checked so that that's all I get in my search results is just US-based records. You can change that to UK and Irish or just Irish so that that then becomes the only thing you see in your search results. So for example, I could come up here and I could do a search for Patrick Doyle, who was born in about 1837 in Ireland. And when I click search, you're going to see here Irish records are the only thing coming up in my search results because I've set that collection priority to only Irish. So I'm not seeing any US Census records or, Pennsylvania birth, marriage, or death or whatever. I'm just seeing databases for Irish records. Now, if you're going to do a global search, that works really well. You can also use the card catalog. If you're not familiar with that, hover over search, come down here and click on card catalog. There's several ways you can filter. So you can filter by record type, you can filter by location, and you can filter by century or decade. You can drill down at that level. You can also just search by a word. So for example, I could search by the word Ireland and get a list of 127 databases that have the word Ireland in the title of the database. So there might be a few things I might miss. That's why we might want to use the filters, but it certainly gets me quickly, without having to filter, quickly it gets me to a list of databases that I might be interested in. Now, as you can see, some of these databases are very large. Make that a little bit bigger for you again. Some of these databases are very large. So this database has 4.5 million records in it. This one has almost 4 million. This one has almost 9.5 million, right? So these are very large collections of a lot of records. Let's take a look at some of these so that you know what you're looking at. First thing you're going to see here are these civil registration indexes. So we have one for marriages that started in 1845, goes through 1958. We have one for births. We talked about that 1864 year. There it is. These go also through 1958. And then we have a death index, also started in 1864, also ends in 1958. Now, this list always defaults to sort by popularity, and so you're almost always going to find those three databases, births, marriages, and deaths, the civil registration indexes, near the top of the list. If we take a look at one of, actually we'll take a look at all three of these. Let's search for, now my Patrick Doyle here was born in 1837, so he's not going to be in the birth index. However, several of his children and some of his grandchildren should be in here as well. And as a matter of fact, he has two grandsons also named Patrick Doyle. One of them was born in 1882. And let's just say I don't know where he was born. Let's just do a search on that and see what we get. Okay, so here's what your search results are going to look like. Now, Patrick Doyle, obviously a very common name, like most of the Irish names that you're going to be dealing with. So the more understanding you have of the geography of the area and the closer you can get to a specific date, the better. If you've ever dealt with the English birth, marriage, and death indexes, these are very similar in that it doesn't list an exact birth date. What you'll see here is that it lists a quarter of registration. So for example, if it was registered in the first quarter of the year, it would say January, February, March. This was registered in the fourth quarter of the year, so it says October, November, December. Now that doesn't mean that this child was born in October, November, or December, just that their birth was registered during that time. So this child could have been born, September 27th. So it just took them a week or two to get that birth registered. But it certainly gives you some, helps you narrow down and have some understanding. There's also a registration district listed, and that registration district sometimes matches the name of the town that your ancestor was from, because sometimes that's the closest registration district happens to be in the same town they're in, but usually not. And so you need to be familiar with the area around the town where your ancestor came from. Now, I just did this simple little exercise this morning. I just typed into Google Irish registration districts, and then I clicked on images. And what you can see here is that there are several places where you can get images that contain the Irish registration districts. I can visit this page. I can look here at the northern half of Ireland. And here's a list of the registration districts where those births, marriages, and deaths would have been registered. So if you just kind of look at this and compare it to a map of the town where your ancestor was from, you can see what registration district they may have lived in. Also keep in mind that if they lived near the border of a registration district, it may have been closer or easier for them to just go here, right? Borders are just imaginary lines on a map. They're not, hard, fast boundaries that people have to stay in most often. And so they could be registered maybe, in any one of 2 or 3 different locations. Again, I found this map by just clicking on, by just Googling Irish registration districts and clicking on images, and it brought me to a list of options for those. This just happens to be one that does the kind of a zoomed in version of the map based on the northern half and the southern half of the country. Get familiar with that. Get familiar with the geography so that you can tell when you're looking at a list here, right? I could look at this list and I could say, well, it's probably not him and it's probably not him. Here are 2 in the same registration district. Here's a registration district that's nearby, right? So I can narrow it down. And here's why that's important. These are just indexes. The General Register's Office of Ireland has not made the certificates themselves available to us. It's the same situation as England and Wales. They make money off of those. So what you need to do is take this information and then contact the General Register's Office to order a copy of the actual register. That then will provide you with information like father's name and residence and occupation, mother's name and maiden name. All of those are pieces of information that you'll get on the actual certificate. But unfortunately, you sometimes have to order 2 or 3 of those certificates before you realize whether or not you have the correct person, because these are just indexes. Okay, that was the civil registration births. Okay, let's talk very quickly about civil registration marriage indexes. And I received an interesting question this week, and I want to make sure that everybody understands how this works. So if I put in Patrick Doyle, 1865, okay, and pull up one of these records, what you're going to see here are the names of several people, okay? And the question that I was asked, and I don't want to confuse anybody, so I hope I say this correctly. The question that I was asked was, can I assume that other people on this list are witnesses to that marriage? And the answer is absolutely not. This is simply a list of other people whose marriages were also recorded on that same page. Okay, so if I'm looking at a record for Patrick Doyle, it doesn't say, there's not a connection up here in the actual record to who Patrick married. However, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 women on that page whose marriages were also recorded. So if I know, for example, that my Patrick Doyle married a Bridget Murphy, then I can have a pretty good guess that this is probably going to be the marriage record that I need to order. Now, if I have a record that my Patrick Doyle married a Margaret O'Brien and I don't see her name listed here, maybe I need to go back to my index and look for another record. Okay, I hope that makes sense, right? So this is just a list of other people whose marriages were recorded on the same page, and what you're looking for is to see if the name of the woman or the maiden name of the woman that you know that he married is on there. Then you know you have the appropriate record so that you can order the actual certificate. So that's how the marriage records work. And then death registers work very similar. They're just, again, just indexes to these, just some basic information here on these particular records. The only additional piece of information that you're going to find on the death records is this. You still have just the quarter of registration and the registration district, but now you have an age at death on many of these records, so that you can see, this Patrick Doyle, his death was registered in 1927, but he was 60 years old at the time. And then you can figure out if that matches up with what you know. This one, he was only 7 years old, so I know that's not my guy. And this guy was only 25 years old, so I know that's not my guy, right? So you can use that age at death to help narrow down some of those choices. So those are the civil registration indexes, birth, marriages, and deaths. We do have several million records included in those 3 databases. A couple of other databases I just want to point out in our remaining few minutes here. One is the Ireland Births and Baptisms database. This has, just about almost 4 million records in it. One thing I always encourage people to do, and I hope that you get in the habit of doing this, whenever you come to a new database, instead of just starting right away to search, scroll down past that search box and read this database description. You'll find things out about the records that might help in your search. So for example, this says Irish church records, which is what this include both those of the Catholic Church, which historically represented about 80% of the population, and the Church of Ireland, the official state church, from 1536 through 1870. While the bulk of church records begin in the late 18th century and early 19th century, some do extend back into the 1600s. So what this is telling me is that if I'm looking for people in, the late 1700s, the early 1800s, chances are I'm probably going to find them between, say 1800 and 1911. That's where the majority of these records fall. However, this database says the records start in 1620. Well, there are some records before that, but they're not complete. Okay, so reading these database descriptions helps you to understand exactly what you're going to find. They also tell you, excuse me. They also tell you what's in the records. So, for example, details in the entries vary depending on the original record, but may include name, birth date, birthplace, christening date, which is what these records typically are baptismal records, gender, father's name, mother's name. Now, it doesn't say mother's maiden name, but oftentimes that is included as well. So, really excellent information. Now, one of the things that is really cool to do with these records is, so for example, if I was searching for, Patrick Doyle, he's my go-to example for Irish records, I could search for him and I could put in an approximate birth year and maybe even a county in Ireland where I knew he was from. But if I knew the names of his parents, I could just put in a father named Patrick Doyle and a mother named Bridget Murphy, right, with no name here. And what that will allow me to do is not just find my person, but also any siblings that may have been baptized in the same location or had the same information on their baptismal records. So you can see here, this is actually, maybe this is connected to my family. This is Patrick Doyle. He was born the 27th of December, 1865. Here is his birthplace in Carlow, and then it lists his parents' names, Patrick and Bridget. I can actually then, go here and just make sure that this full information then you can see here includes his mother's maiden name. So on the index, it just lists Patrick and Bridget as the parents, but when you click through to the record, then it lists the mother's maiden name. So really, it's a handy little search trick that you don't actually have to have a name when you search. If you plug in enough other information, I could say, you know what, show me only those who were in Carlow, and I could mark that exact even, and then do that search. And you see here now all my search results are only for Carlow, and here is one in 1865 and one in 1867. Maybe these two are siblings. If they have parents with the exact same name, that's very likely. This is especially useful. There were, in a lot of Irish families, siblings would migrate or immigrate to the United States together. So you might know that, that Patrick Doyle had a sister named Catherine and a brother named Stephen. And now you may not know their parents' names yet, but if you find a record for one of them, you can then use this system to find a record for all of them, and then to make sure that all of the children are accounted for as well. It also helps you narrow down, if that you have the right parents. So handy little trick that I use quite a bit, where you do a search, don't include a name, just include other pieces of information to see what comes up in your search results. Okay, we've got 7 minutes. Let's see if I can get through the last two databases that I want to talk about. And as you can see, there's 127 databases full of Irish records. I would encourage you to explore them, but the things that I've been teaching can apply to any of them, right? Always read the database description, figure out what you're getting yourself into. You don't have to have names necessarily to search. You can search specific locations. The Griffiths Valuation is one of those where it's an interesting exercise to search by surname only. So Griffiths Valuation was taken between 1848 and 1864, and basically what it is it's a listing of people who lived on specific property, and it was created for the purpose of determining taxes. So I can come in here and I can type in Patrick Doyle and see what comes up, and here's this list of people. This example is always a little bit interesting to me. So here is the occupier, which means the person who was living on the land was the Reverend Patrick Doyle, okay? The lesser, or the person who owned the land that Patrick was living on, was the Right Honorable W.F. Teague, okay? And then it lists the county and the barony and the parish and the townland information. Now, here's the thing about Griffiths Valuation. Over here, you're going to see there are two images attached to this one index entry. So the first one is the actual index typed. It's a typed, obviously, right? It's not the handwritten index from 1848. It is a typed version of it. And you can see here, let me make this just a smidge bigger. You can see here, here's the Reverend Patrick Doyle. The owner of the land is this Right Honorable W.F. Teague. Now, if you look through that column, you can see that he owned quite a bit of property there that these people were all living on. Okay, and that becomes kind of interesting. You can also see here what was on the land, right? So in some cases it was houses and offices and land. In some cases it was just land. In the case of our Reverend Patrick Doyle, it's a house, an office, and land. And then there is, over here, some information about the value of the land and the value of the buildings. Again, remember, Griffiths Valuation was done for the purpose of taxation, and so the value of the land was important to them so that they could make some of those decisions about taxation. So this is one of those things. It's kind of it is something of a census substitute, right? Because so many of the census records were destroyed in the 1922 fire. So it helps you, but it's only head of household, right? It's only the person who was the occupier of the land and the person who was the owner of the land. So it doesn't list every member of the household, but it can give you an idea of whether or not you are looking in the right place. The second image here then is the map that goes with it. And you're probably not going to be able to see this very well on your screen. I would encourage you to go play with it on your own. Go find the Irish Griffiths Valuation database. Do just a generic search to see. But I can make this a little bit bigger. But these maps are labeled. They are so detailed, but you have to look through. So I would come over here and I would say, here's the information about the townland that he lived in. And so I can come here and look for that specific townland. And there are even things like churches and cemeteries. I mean, there's lots of really great detail on these maps so that you know what it is that you're looking at. So you know where that land is that they actually lived on in Ireland. And that's exciting. There's something really exciting to me, anyway, about being able to know exactly the spot of land that your ancestors farmed and worked and raised their children on. And if you have the opportunity to go there, even better. Okay. So that is Griffiths Valuation. The final database that I want to talk about today is the tithe allotment books. So these are also created for taxation purposes. However, they are a little bit earlier, and this is critical, especially for those of you who have potato famine Irish ancestors, right? The potato famine occurred in the 1840s, and that's when a lot of people left Ireland to immigrate to the United States. And so if your family came over during then you're not going to find them in a lot of those later records like civil registration or even Griffiths Valuation. But the tithe allotment books was a land survey to determine tax payable by landholders to the Church of England, and it was taken in 1823 to 1837. They're called books because the originals were handwritten books, right? Now what you're going to see is just this virtual census of people who were in Ireland before the Great Famine. And so I can come here and you can see, you can even trace a particular ancestor if you know the years that they may have lived in different locations. Most of them were fairly stationary. There wasn't a lot of inter-country migration in Ireland, not like we have here in the United States. And so for many of them, when they picked up and migrated to the United States, that was the first big move that they made. And so I can trace one person through several years of these tithe allotment books based on that. Now, when I click on this, you're going to see this. That's all there is. There is no set of images. There's no further information there. It just gets you to a townland. Now, one of the things that people use this particular kind of a database for is to see if a specific surname even existed in a specific county. So I could type in Doyle, for example, and I could mark that exact. And then I could come in here and I could type in Carlo, and I could mark that exact, and I can click search, and this will tell me, yeah, there are several people, right, who have the surname Doyle living in County Carlo. I could do that same thing for other locations in Ireland, and I might get a different result. And so if you have maybe a little bit more unusual surname, or if you're not sure about the frequency of the surname in that location, the tithe allotment books offer you just a really quick glimpse into that period of time, that 1823 to 1837 pre-Great Famine era of Ireland, to just see where some of those surnames may have been concentrated. That might help you get a little bit closer to discovering more specifically where your Irish ancestors were from. Of course, your best bet is going to be just following some of those tips that I provided for you on Tuesday. If you haven't watched that video yet, I would encourage you to do so. It's called Beginning Irish Research. Come armed with as much information as possible from the family structure and what you know about them in US records, and you'll have so much more success when you start diving into those Irish records. Well, we are out of time, and I'm sure there are questions I did not answer. I do have some time this evening and will be available on chat here in just a few minutes if you're watching this live. If you're watching an archived version of this, feel free to drop me a question at ask@ancestry.com. If I see that I'm getting quite a few questions about Irish research, we'll see if we can schedule a follow-up or a maybe a level 2 Irish research webinar, and we can talk about that a little bit more in detail next time around. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.